I have a television studio in my hand. I have a production unit, an editing unit, a broadcasting unit. This is a TV studio. And when we appropriate this as a tool and use it against our enemy, we can compete. We can, even though we might not have the same reach that NBC, CBS, all these companies have, we can still build a large enough presence to challenge them.
You would be surprised when you live in the global South, the extent to which big outlets, international outlets, news outlets do not have collaborators in the specific location you're in. They keep their collaborators and their correspondents in the capital or in the largest cities. So there's just like a 100% chance that if a major mobilization is taking place in a rural area or far from the capital, that there's not going to be anyone covering it. So it's really important that people understand the role that we have or the potential we have to get that information out.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. My name is Ramiro Sebastian Funes, as Fausto and Erika mentioned. First of all, I just want to pay my respects to Compañero Fausto and to Compañera Erika. Erika is one of the most hardest working people I know. She's very humble and does a lot and is a very integral part of Friends of the ATC and the Sandinista Revolution, introducing the Sandinista Revolution to the youth of the United States. So I want to shout out to Erika and, of course, Compañero Fausto, who is, has contributed his body, his life to the Sandinista Revolution. So he is an elder that we have to pay our respects to, learn from, and it's always an honor to be in the same space as him because he's somebody who we can learn a lot from. So the topic of today's presentation is digital guerrilla warfare, building revolutionary media. And I'm glad that both myself and Camila are focusing on this concept of digital guerrilla warfare. And I think it's appropriate for the conversation that we're having here as leftists, as revolutionaries, as anti-imperialists, because this is what we're up against. We're up against mainstream media. We're up against empire. Just a few days ago, a major TV network in the United States put out a campaign ad, an imperialist propaganda ad against Nicaragua, calling for the release of a so-called political prisoner. I think the name of the TV show, I forget the name of it, but it's some like teen television show here in the United States. So already...
Riverdale, I think.
Riverdale, exactly. So there's this TV show for youth in the United States called Riverdale. One of the producer's father is a so-called political prisoner, a right-winger. And already, this is a show that's completely unrelated to Nicaragua, never once mentions politics, but has millions of people viewing it. And their only mention of Nicaragua once is saying that it's a dictatorship, that people are being oppressed. So we're up against the largest telecommunications networks on the planet. We're up against mainstream media. And all of us here ourselves who are revolutionaries, who are activists in solidarity with not only the ATC, but also, and La Via Campesina, but also the Sandinista Revolution, all revolutionary movements, in a way, we're carrying on the torch that Fausto initiated in his youth with the actual guerrilla warfare struggle. Now we're carrying that tradition into the new realm of war, because we've all heard of fifth dimensional warfare. We've all heard of warfare evolving and changing. And the warfare that we're experiencing today is no longer taking place with frontline infantry battalions, but is taking place on social media, on television networks, on websites. So the landscape has totally changed. And as Lenin himself said, if the situation and the conditions change in 24 hours, our tactics have to change in 24 hours. And so this is what I'm hoping to focus on today, is give an overview of how we as progressives, as leftists, as people in solidarity with the Sandinista Revolution can use a very minimal amount of resources and technology to have a maximum impact against some of the biggest enemies out there of our people. So I want to share with you all the one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite revolutionary leaders, his name Malcolm X. I'm sure a lot of us are aware of him. He said, "The media is the most powerful entity on earth. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and to make the guilty innocent." And we're seeing this today happen against Comandante Daniel Ortega, where Comandante Ortega is a hero of the people, somebody who risked his life, his body, his everything, his family, to uplift the people of Nicaragua, to bring dignity, respect, peace for the people of Nicaragua. And yet he is treated like enemy number one in media, not only in Nicaragua, but in all Western mainstream media. And so even though those of us working class people have so much in common with Daniel, he's a humble man, somebody who has put his life on the line for people. He's treated as our enemy. He's treated as somebody who's guilty of something. And I just wanted to use that quote to illustrate the power of media. So we can go to the next slide. These are just a few quotes to kind of set the mood, because this is very ideological, I would say, because this is different from a traditional communications presentation where we're focusing on metrics and things like that. This is oriented toward people who want to start off very basic fundamentals of creating revolutionary media platforms. And we need that ideological context to understand that. Another one of my favorite revolutionary writers, activist, Michael Parenti, great guy. I highly suggest his books if you're interested in quote unquote red pilling or introducing younger people to socialism or communism. His books are very well written, easy to understand, and he talks a lot about Nicaragua. His speeches are amazing, as Comrade Libre mentioned in the chat. Michael Parenti is a great resource. He actually helped me learn more about socialism. And Michael Parenti on the purpose of media says, quote, "The press does many things and serves many functions, but its major role, its irreducible responsibility, is to continually recreate a view of reality supportive of existing social and economic class power." So in simple English, and in other words, right, the function of the press is to recreate capitalism, to recreate the dominant system, to recreate the values. So this is not just necessarily about anti-socialist propaganda. This is about creating the norm. The fact that in mainstream media, even in Latino media, you have lighter skinned people, you have people dressed a certain way, they're speaking a certain language. Everything sets the tone and sets a normative idea of what is good and what is bad. And in many ways, the media serves that role of establishing the norm of society. So again, a lot of times it's not just about what they're saying, it's about how they're saying it, what they're wearing when they're saying it, the tone, the people that they show. So I wanted to include that as well. And then just one more quote on the next slide. Mercedes Sosa, a famous Argentine revolutionary singer, artist, one of my favorite musicians who pioneered the genre of Nueva Canción in Argentina and all over Latin America. One of the true OGs, one of the true revolutionary mothers of the movement, Mercedes Sosa, on the role of culture in media, because this is another component of media as well. We're talking about news media, culture, politics. There's so many components. So Mercedes Sosa talking about the role of culture. Culture is the only thing that can save a people, because culture allows us to see misery and fight it. Culture makes it possible to distinguish. Oh, sorry. Culture is the only thing that can save a people, because culture allows us to see. I think somebody. Hold on. I think somebody. No, it's cool.
Necesitamos que se. Hold on just a sec. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's cool. No worries.
Mercedes, estás ahí. ¿Me puedes ayudar con el micrófono?
Decirles que el compañero. ¿Qué?
Perfect. Thank you.
Sorry, I gotta reshare.
No worries.
It's hard to do the multiple functions, but Mercedes también estás ahí para ayudar.
Hola, amigo.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right, going back.
Cool. Thank you. So Mercedes Sosa, one of the revolutionary mothers of the Latin American Nueva Canción movement, somebody who pioneered this beautiful genre, said, "Culture is the only thing that can save a people because culture allows us to see misery and fight it. Culture makes it possible to distinguish what needs to be changed and what should be left behind." And I like this quote in particular, especially as it relates to media, because a big part of building revolutionary movement is culture, is using the media to promote culture. And one of the biggest accomplishments of the Sandinista revolution, I believe, is adequately understanding that the media is a tool in the same way that the bourgeoisie, the ruling class, can appropriate media and use it to promote garbage like Telemundo and Univision and novelas and mainstream media and corporate Sábado Gigante and all this nonsense. We can also appropriate the media and promote our revolutionary culture to show what people go through, to show the lives of, for example, people in Nicaragua who have been radically transformed by the Sandinista revolution. Those profiles, images of people's faces, people speaking, people's art, people's music, that is the best way, in my opinion, to win people over to a revolutionary cause, using culture and media, because it connects to what is human. And I think this is what Mercedes Sosa is alluding to. So we can go to the next slide. So again, the purpose of the presentation is to successfully build and maintain revolutionary media platforms with few resources, few people, and minimal experience. I don't know, Erika, if it's possible to bring up the image that is on the slide, or I don't know. I guess it must have come off. Okay. Anyway, in the image I had, we all have seen the image of El Hombre Molotov in Nicaragua, the guerrilla fighter in Esteli, who was holding a Coca-Cola bottle Molotov cocktail and was lancing it toward the Somoza regime guards. And as a guerrilla fighter, he was fighting against the right-wing state, imperialism. And I think that that image perfectly represents the guerrilla movement of the 70s, where it was hand-to-hand combat, direct confrontation. The image that was included in this slide is an image of the same man, El Hombre Molotov. However, in this case, inside of the Molotov cocktail were the logos of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, SoundCloud, etc. And so the symbolism, in a way, is to bring the guerrillas to learn the tactics and the strategies of the guerrilla movement of the 70s, of the 80s, and adapt it to the 21st century, to 21st century warfare, where these battles are taking place in the digital space. And this will tie into what I mentioned at the beginning of carrying the torch of the lessons of elders like Fausto, who understands that with a small number of people, with a few resources, but with the passion and the desire to change, to overthrow an enemy, you can win, you can overcome this. So this is sort of the morale that I want to keep, right? Because again, this can be another boring social media conversation about how to set up a Facebook ad or whatever. And that's important. And I don't want to rule that out. But I just wanted to start with this to set the ideological tone for how we operate and why. Just to give a background of my experience, so I'm just not some regular random dude on the internet. I come from a journalism background. I do my own independent stuff now, but I studied journalism in college. I went to St. John's University for journalism. I got my master's at NYU in politics. I worked for a few years for newspapers in New York City, doing print journalism, the Daily News, and several other newspapers. I've written for political blogs, Mike, World Policy Institute, NACLA, which is horrible on Nicaragua, by the way, ever since I left. And there is discussing the stuff that's coming out of that publication now. So I'm kind of embarrassed to even have them on there. America's Quarterly. I also did some communications work for unions with videography, along with compañera Camila. I worked at Telesur English as well. I started Anticonquista in 2016. Now, recently, I've been doing a lot of segments for Press TV, which is an Iranian news site that is based in Tehran. And I also have a podcast on my YouTube channel called Unmasking Imperialism. And also, as Compañero Fausto mentioned, in March, I visited Nicaragua and had the chance to produce this documentary, Nicaragua Against Empire, bilingual documentary about Nicaragua's resistance to sanctions and the history of the Sandinista revolution. So I just wanted to give that background, and you can kind of see how, as I got into journalism, I went very much to the left as you progress down the list. And it was through my experience in these bourgeois media newsrooms that I was able to understand the real class nature of the media, and not to totally do away with it, but to appropriate it as a tool in our struggle against empire. So ideology, theory, again, we're guided by, we're not just any communications people, we're not just a random mainstream media workshop. We are revolutionaries who want to build revolutionary platforms that reflect the interests of working class people around the world. So this is sort of the basis of where I'm coming from: Marxism, Leninism, anti-imperialism, internationalism. I think the video that we had at the beginning was very beautiful because you had the compañera from the Dominican Republic, the compañera from Panama, compañera from Nicaragua, etc. That is internationalism in practice. Anti-imperialism, that the peoples of the world, of oppressed nations, are united in this common struggle against empire. Modernism, what does that mean? Modernism, the idea that there is structure, that there is objective reality. One of the weapons that has been used against the anti-imperialist left, that the CIA supported for many years, was postmodernism. The idea that there are no good guys, there is no objective reality, everything is wrong. And we've seen this manifest in many ways with so-called leftists supporting right-wing protests against anti-imperialist movements. Socialist realism, a lot of the Nicaraguan art and media that's used is socialist realism, showing real people doing real things, a very clear message from a proletarian perspective. Instrumentalism, what does that mean? Instrumentalism, going back to what we were talking about, the media being used as a tool, that there are people who say, you know, the media is a problem, get off your phones, turn off the TVs, move away from it, right? And I also think that's a too much of an extreme, because the same way that Leninism understands that the state is an instrument to be used by one class to dominate another, and the proletariat can seize that state, that instrument, and use it to suppress the ruling class, we can apply the same logic to the media. The media is an instrument that the proletarian class, our class, can seize and use against the ruling class. So we shouldn't bow away, right? We shouldn't obviously endlessly consume social media, but we should learn how to properly use and utilize Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of these platforms against our enemy in the most effective way, and not just be passive consumers of it. Lastly, proletarian journalism, the idea that we do have an objective position. One of the main tenets in bourgeois media is that as a journalist, you have no position, you should have no bias, you're totally objective, you have no skin in the game. I completely disagree with this concept, and it's incorrect. Obviously, everyone in humanity has a bias, has a political purpose, has some sort of ideas that can create a conflict of interest in how they report things. And instead of claiming we're unbiased, instead of claiming we're neutral, we should say outwardly, look, we're creating media in defense of the Sandinista revolution. We support this cause or that cause. And I think we live now in the age of authenticity, where nobody watches local news in your local city, like ABC Atlanta, right? You don't go to that for your global news. You go to your specific podcasters or commentators because people want somebody who is deeply connected with an issue to speak about that issue, who's there, who's like, I believe this. And that's sort of the approach that we have to take, right? We shouldn't separate ourselves from the content of what we're covering. We should connect ourselves, right? Because it is through practice that we are able to learn more about something, and in doing so, we can do a better job of explaining. Methodology, guerrilla warfare. So the theory and the practice. So now we're going into the tactics of building revolutionary social media platforms, building a media presence. the methodology that we're taking a look at and some of the tactics, guerrilla warfare, foquismo. First of all, guerrilla warfare, the term guerrilla, guerra in Spanish is war, guerrilla means little war, and it reflects the idea that you can confront a larger, it actually comes from the Peninsular Wars during the 1800s, but basically it reflects the idea that you can defeat a large standing army that's mainly static, right? In this case, the large standing army would be Telemundo, ABC, NBC, right? They have money, they have resources, they have staff. That's the large standing army. That you can defeat that large standing army with a group of small, fast moving units, guerrillas, right? Small, fast moving units, guerrilla units to defeat a larger enemy by focusing on one issue, foquismo, to focus on one particular issue or enemy to directly hit that. And we're seeing that happen all the time, by the way, not even by quote unquote leftists per se, but people who are trying to, let's say, speak out against a restaurant, right? Like there was this restaurant in New York called Carmine's that recently was accused of, kicking out some young Black women from Texas who were being attacked and where some racist stuff was being said against them. And people on social media with zero money, zero presence were able to put enough pressure to use hashtags, to use posts to basically get people to stop supporting that business. So that's just one example, right? Mass line, Mao Zedong, mass line, how do we connect to the issues of the masses, right? What are people thinking about on the everyday thing? Because obviously we're not going to come to people with, all right, with these abstract ideas, with talking about these hierarchies, and we have to approach it in a way that what are the masses talking about and how do we mold our ideas to fit and package our ideas to the masses. And I think one of the best ways that the ATC has been able to do this, just as an example, is with the profiles of the cooperativas, of the campesinos, of the friends of the ATC, showing human beings their everyday lives. Because right now, with COVID-19 and the pandemic, everyone is talking about food sovereignty. Everyone is talking about supply chains, inflation, the price of goods going up, right? So how do we apply Sandinismo? How do we package that in a way that is of interest to somebody in Detroit or somebody in New Orleans who can't pay, their bills, wants food, wants to start their own farm? Well, here are these cool people in Nicaragua who are doing that right now, and we can learn from them. And then we can get to the Sandinismo stuff later. So mass line, how do we reach the masses in a way that's palatable? Lastly, agitprop, agitation propaganda. Propaganda is putting ideas out there. Propaganda tends to have a negative connotation in mainstream media, but propaganda is actually just informing the people of a certain idea, educating the masses. And then agitation is when once they have those ideas, then you're saying, we should fight for those ideas, right? So you're educating, agitate, educate, organize, right? So that's sort of the methodology that we have in mind when we're talking about communication. Digital warfare, what is digital warfare? Monopolization, corporatization, censorship, distraction, consent, astroturfing. Digital warfare is happening every day, every second of every day it's happening to us. In the United States, every day there are less media companies. There's a monopoly. All of these institutions that we see on the screen now, ABC, Fox, MSNBC, CNN, they're all owned by the same multinational banks, the same oil giants, the same corporations that have an agenda. And that agenda is to get rid of anti-imperialist governments around the world that bump against their interests. So monopolization and corporatization is a big problem. Censorship, people with anti-imperialist views, people with anti-imperialist perspectives are being censored online. If you speak out, people who were saying that the 2014 so-called chemical weapons attack against President Assad in Syria, was not true, were being censored. They were being called conspiracy theorists. They were being called crazy lunatics. And censorship is happening as we speak against anti-imperialist left voices. Distraction. People are being bombarded. TikTok, every 5 seconds, here, watch this person dancing, watch this dog jumping and doing this. That's another way of how the ruling class is using the media to bombard us, to overstimulate us with information, to keep us distracted, so that we're not like, I saw this headline that Daniel Ortega is a dictator. Let me look into that. Let me find out what that's about. No, with distraction, they keep us at such a low level, low vibrational level of information digestion that we're not going to look into those things because that 5 second dancing TikTok video is more appealing at the moment. So that's another weapon, right? We have to understand the multiple ways that this warfare is taking place. Consent. They build consent for a war, right? Do you all remember September? I mean, I don't know if some of you are alive, old enough to remember this, but September 11th, weapons of mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction. Every other day, they were saying that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, that we need to go in and kill Saddam Hussein, we need to invade Iraq because of 9/11. They're building consent for a regime change operation. Same thing, they use SOS Nicaragua, SOS Nicaragua, SOS Nicaragua, Venezuela, SOS Cuba. Same thing, right? They're building consent. They're putting out this narrative so that people, once you digest it long enough, you say, oh, we should go in and invade that country, right? Lastly, astroturfing. What is astroturf? Astroturf is fake grass. If you've ever been to a football field, a soccer field, you'll see that a lot of times the grass is fake. And what is a grassroots campaign? A grassroots campaign is a campaign that is created organically from the ground up, from a movement, from the people, right? A people's movement. No NGO money, no governmental money, completely independent from the people bottom up. So astroturfing sees that a grassroots movement has a lot of power because it has the power of the people. Astroturfing is creating a fake grassroots movement where it didn't exist to begin with. And SOS Nicaragua is a great example of that. SOS Cuba is a great example of that. SOS Venezuela, right? Those are great examples of astroturfing. And that is the principal use of digital warfare that's being used against our people today, creating fake grassroots campaigns that make it seem like people are rebelling against their governments. And in reality, it's funded by the NED, it's funded by the USAID, by NGOs. And so this is important to keep in mind. We can go to the next slide. Digital guerrilla warfare, applying guerrilla warfare tactics to the digital landscape, building large and influential revolutionary media platforms or trends that challenge the dominance of mainstream media despite being outnumbered and outfinanced, right? This is what I was mentioning before. NBC, CBS, they all have huge amounts of money. They're funded by the Rockefellers. They're funded by the biggest oil companies and banks. They have the nice studios. But one of the contradictions of capitalism is that, as Lenin said, the capitalist creates the rope and sells the rope that the workers used to hang him with. That we can use this technology. Right now, what you're looking at, I have a television studio in my hand. I have a production unit, an editing unit, a broadcasting unit. This is a TV studio. And when we appropriate this as a tool and use it against our enemy, we can compete. We can, even though we might not have the same reach that NBC, CBS, all these companies have, we can still build a large enough presence to challenge them. And we've seen this happen before with new. Next slide. Successful campaigns didn't necessarily define themselves as leftist or as using the tactics of digital guerrilla warfare, but I think these are good examples. Occupy Wall Street. Do you all remember that? 2011, actually just 10 years ago this month. Hashtag Occupy Wall Street, right? It all started organically. I remember I grew up in New York and people just started, this is when Twitter just really started kicking off. People started using hashtag Occupy Wall Street. And that one hashtag evolved into a huge worldwide movement within a few days, right? That's a pretty big deal if you think about it. No corporate funding, no banks, no NGOs initially, right? None of that. And it grew into this huge international movement. Black Lives Matter, again, same thing when it initially began. Hashtag Black Lives Matter, organic, grassroots, people in Ferguson, people in New York we're using Black Lives Matter. Now everybody in the world knows what Black Lives Matter is, right? And this is again done with this. They didn't have NBC, they didn't have CBS, right? Another great example in Latin America, Ni Una Menos, speaking out against femicide, speaking out against the violation of women's rights, attacks on women, femicides. And Ni Una Menos is a huge movement that continues to evolve today. And I just wanted to give an example of reactionary successful campaigns that have been used: SOS Cuba, SOS Nicaragua. So we can go on to the next slide. I'm going to speed it up because I see that I'm a little low on time. 3 forms of media outreach that I want to talk about. So now that we've kind of gone over how we're engaging in warfare, right, in this digital warfare, small units of fast-moving accounts, we can create Instagram accounts, Twitter accounts, YouTube accounts that are creating lots of content frequently and directed at a target. So these are the 3 forms of media outreach that we can use to grow our media outlets, our revolutionary media outlets. 1 is owned media, 2 is earned media, and 3 is paid media. So whenever we're talking about getting the word out about a campaign or a cause, these are the 3 areas of media outreach that we should always have in mind. So let's start off with the first one, owned media. Owned media consists of original assets such as blog posts and videos published directly on multimedia platforms owned and operated by the organization attempting to spread the message. This is everything we see on the screen, right? Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Snapchat, Instagram, WhatsApp, Twitch, everything, right? So all of these platforms are free. That's the interesting thing about the media landscape. It used to be in the past that if you wanted news, if you wanted information, you had to buy a TV, you had to get cable, you had to tune into your local 6 o'clock news to get, there was a monopoly over the technology. Now that technology has been accessible to everybody. So now anybody can start a news channel, anybody can start a blog, anybody can start a podcast, anybody can start an Instagram page. So this is owned media. And this is the foundation of digital guerrilla warfare, the foundation of producing revolutionary content, because this is where your content will live. This is where your videos, your graphics, everything will be hosted. And this is where you will direct people. And you will use all of these platforms to cross promote. So if you have a Facebook post that's getting tons of shares, send it over to Twitter. If you have a tweet that's blown up, that's getting a lot of attention, post it on YouTube, right? Talk about it. And you can cross promote and cross feed all of your owned media platforms so that they're all growing in sync together. We can go to the next one. Next slide. Yeah. Earned media. What is earned media? Earned media are assets that are shared by the organization's message, but are created by separate parties, such as news stories or profiles in a newspaper or online news website. This typically is a function of public relations or media relations. So a lot of times organizations will have a media relations person, a PR person, and earned media is now that you've created this product, right? Because I hate to sound like a capitalist here, but we also have to think of it as a commodity, right? Media. Once we have this product, right? Let's say we've created this beautiful video about women in the ATC who are farming, who are liberating their space, who are doing all of this great work, serving their community. We can't just leave it there on the owned media platforms, right? Because again, we don't have the same reach that these huge multinational networks have. So now that we've built that owned media, now that we've created the commodity or the product, now we have to distribute it. We have to get it to market, right? As they say, we have to put it out there. So what does that mean? That means writing press releases, right? A sheet of paper, simple. And if you want some examples of how to write a press release, feel free to reach out to me. I think Erika as well has some experience with that. Press releases are a great way to send information about a particular video out there. So if you've created a new video, for example, a new piece of content, you can write a press release that says, new video highlights accomplishments of women, Sandinista campesinas in Nicaragua. Here's the quotes, here's some people, some images, boom, send it out to all the news sites, right? And what that is doing with earned media, what you're essentially doing is you're selling the story, you're selling this commodity or package that you have to the outlets to spread the word so that they start talking about you. So it's not just you talking about you, it's other people sharing your content as well. So that's another very important part. And I think that it's very integral in terms of building an outreach. Paid media. These are assets associated with ad spending, such as social media advertisements, paid search ads, paid commercials on TV or radio, or the placement of an ad on a guest blog post on a news website. And again, right, this doesn't necessarily have to be mainstream bourgeois media. This can be other revolutionary platforms. So let's say, let's say we have a new Friends of the ATC video that, again, right, is talking about campesinas and or a certain campaign that we want to promote. We can use that video or ad or whatever it is, and we can hit up Telesur, right? We can hit up Hispan TV, we can hit up Anticonquista, we can hit up Caos en la Red, we can hit up all of these different outlets, right? And be like, here's this photo, here's this graphic, here's this ad. Would you like to feature this in your blog post, in your website, in your video, right? Some people do that on YouTube as well. They'll have ads on their YouTube videos. So like, before we go to this episode, check out our friends at this or that. And that's a good way of paid media again, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be with bourgeois. We're not going to take an ad in the New York Times, right, for the Friends of the ATC, but we can hit up our friends and allies who have big outlets and say, if you guys need help fundraising or whatever, here's $10, here's $20. We'd love for you to put this on your blog post or on your Instagram page. Tagging, right? That's a big thing on social media. Can you tag us? Can you link us, right? So that way people will go. So that's another component of building a media presence. 3 forms of content creation: visual, audio, and print. So again, when we're conceptualizing, now that we understand how we're engaging in this digital guerrilla warfare, and now that we understand the different strategies, right? Owned media, earned media, paid media, now we can think about the 3 types of content that we're creating. These are the weapons, these are the bullets, the arms, right? Visuals, which I put as number 1. All statistics have shown that visual content performs the best. Videos in particular, graphics in particular, photos, right? I recently saw one of the videos that with Edgardo from ATC. It was a beautiful video of Edgardo when he was young talking about El Machete. And I thought that was such a beautiful video because it showed him when he was in his youth talking about the newspaper and how they created it. That is a great example of a piece of content that will do very well. It's visual, it tells a story. Audio is good as well. And right now we live in the era of the rise in podcasts, right? And everyone is listening to podcasts. Everyone is producing podcasts. Why is that? Because you can listen to a long form piece of content that if you're driving, like if I'm driving to work and I have a 30 or 40-minute commute, I can put on a podcast on my car and just let it play. And it feels like I'm having a conversation with somebody in my car and I'm just listening in, right? So podcasts, especially after the pandemic, have become very popular because of alienation, because people are isolated, people are inside, they don't have that same sense of social interaction. So podcasts are a great way to promote any idea. So if you have an organization, a group, a cause that you want to promote, start a podcast and have those conversations. Put that out there. Also because podcasts are, the memory size are very low and they're very easy to share. You can share them on WhatsApp. Everyone in Latin America uses WhatsApp, and you can use WhatsApp to share podcasts. Audiobooks, also another thing, right? Maybe in the future we could do El Machete audiobook that people could download and listen to, right? Like how cool would that be? Lastly, print. This is a little more outdated. This is, blogs, leaflets, books, newsletters, still very important. Don't get me wrong. Very useful. But let's be real, right? How many times have you gotten emails from organizations that you care about? You love this organization, you follow their work, but you get an email with this, 20,000 word email and this thesis and campaign, you're not going to read that email. Let's be real, right? You're not going to read that email. But if they send you a video, here's this new video we've created, 30-second snappy video, boom, you're going to watch it because it's more digestible, right? So again, this is kind of the hierarchy I think that we have to keep in mind. Video content, graphics, photos, that is number one. Original photos. Then is audio, podcasts, promos, audiobooks. Lastly, print. These are some list of free online websites where you can edit videos and edit graphics, right? So I'm going to just list them quickly. Canva, highly suggested. Get Canva ASAP if you haven't already. Canva is very useful. There are paid versions as well. There's a free version, but there's also a paid version. Vimeo, Clipchamp, WeVideo, Capwing, Fast Reel, Animoto, and Clidio. For graphics, for social media design, Canva, excellent site, Canva. Photor, Design Wizard, Pictochart, that allows you to put information into digestible charts that you can use to put information out there. Crello, BeFunky, and Vector. These are all websites. And again, right, if you're doing a video or a graphic, so let's say you want to make a video out of something you recorded, you could do all of this on your phone, right? You don't need fancy technology. You can do all of this on your phone. Same with the graphics. So these are free online sources for visual content creation. And these are tools that we can use in the struggle against mainstream media outlets that are waging war on our people. And I just wanted to introduce, I think Camila's going to get more into the nitty gritty and the technical aspect of it, which is very, very important. But I just kind of wanted to set the tone ideologically for how we're approaching this, because yes, we can defeat Telemundo, we can defeat NBC just with our phones, but we have to have a compelling story. We have to have the right technology. And so I just wanted to end that we can successfully wage the struggle. And this is, in a nutshell, the art of digital guerrilla warfare. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ramiro Ahmed, who I really respect and have learned a lot from. We will also share a copy of Ramiro's presentation because the last few slides include some really practical, excellent information for anyone who wants to go to war through communications, which, as we always say in Colloquia Campesina, is not just a role for people who are quote unquote the comunicadores, the communicators of the organization, but it's a collective task. We all have to go to battle there. So thank you, Ramiro, and I'm sorry, we always run out of time. Also just say that Ramiro has also been accompanying some of the collective work here for some of our folks here who have communications tasks within the operating secretariat of the clock, and we've been learning a lot, and we're going to continue to be doing some exchanges online. So thank you. So appreciative of you, Ramiro, and all the work you do. So I'll pass it over to another person who I really respect and have learned a lot from as well. Someone who this year on the anniversary of the revolution was on the street in the plaza, taking videos, and I would watch her immediately edit them and add subtitles and upload them to Twitter. And I was so amazed that someone could do that so quickly and so eloquently. And that really helped bring a live presence, a live international presence on the ground here of what was truly happening in Nicaragua, despite the many lies that are circulated internationally. So without further ado, Camila, I'll pass it over to you. You can go ahead and get started. And while you're getting started, I will work on sharing your presentation.
Okay, thanks so much for inviting me. It's an honor to collaborate with Fausto and Erika and the ATC and the Friends of the ATC and everyone else there who carry out their own creation of media and dissemination of materials. This is an effort that I've seen really improve in terms of quality and quantity. And it's a constant effort to produce these items and get the information out. Like you said, it's something that several people in the ATC and Friends of the ATC are tasked with, and it's a collective work. And I've seen the same thing in numerous other popular organizations. It's really important because most popular organizations don't have celebrity journalists serving as their reporter, or I mean, even the level of following that myself and my colleagues have here is actually quite large. We have a lot of people here who are kind of very well known in the rural areas here. And I know that not every organization has that, and not every organization has people who have worked in news outlets, and people within different grassroots movements are nevertheless tasked in creating their own information to be disseminated. And I'm also happy to say that we'll be arriving in Nicaragua at the end of next month in order to present and report on the important electoral process taking place there, though I don't have details yet, but I'm looking forward to that. On myself, I studied political science. I did not study journalism. I'm a Latin America correspondent for Press TV and U News Lebanon, and a forever friend of Telesur, though I officially left this year in order to push forward Causation News, our Bolivia-based English project, which we began during the coup last year, during the coup dictatorship. And we had been planning to launch a similar outlet in Bolivia, actually in La Paz, before the coup took place. And because of the circumstances, we ended up coming here to rural Bolivia. And as for what Ramiro said, myself and my colleague Ali Vargas here have never hidden our revolutionary roots or intentions, my own and the FMLN armed struggle in El Salvador of my family, and his revolutionary Bolivian roots here. And our work is grounded in those ideologies and in line with the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of rural workers here. So Radio Causation Coca and Causation News is a news outlet owned by one of the largest unions here, and it's the largest Cocalero Federation in Bolivia, which is producers of the traditional coca leaf and other agriculture, which is led by Evo Morales and other historic leaders of Bolivia's struggle against the DEA and US presence during the neoliberal period of Bolivia during the 1980s and the 2000s. So what are some of the types of coverage that we do here at the radio station? Well, it's a radio station, first of all, but we do a lot of live streams because we're not quite a television station yet, although there's a lot of pressure for this outlet to convert into a TV station because of its tremendous impact and importance during the coup. And we have built a new studio here with a green screen and couches and kind of like other setups so that we can begin to expand. But this is something that's just beginning. And of course, because we're a radio station, there's not necessarily people here who have television experience, such as myself. So we do a lot of live streams. That's a lot of our coverage is events being streamed live or live streams of the radio programs. We do a lot of interviews on the Facebook, which is generally where in Spanish, Radio Causation Coca has its largest following, over 400,000 people, is where they share photo galleries. We do videos, scenes of events, of mobilizations. Also, the workers here serve as MCs for events, hyping people, introducing Evo and other leaders. We do, of course, cultural programs on the radio as well, not only news, and we interview ministers and main government figures. And we cover a lot of commemorative events on anniversaries. We do expos, which are of locally produced coffee, domestically produced agricultural items, products made from coca, cultural events featuring Bolivian music and dance, opening or relaunches of Bolivian industry, like a sugar factory. This week, a grocery store was opened here in the municipality of Chinauta, where we live. And we don't have grocery stores here in the rural area. I don't think we have a single grocery store in the towns next to us or anything. I don't know where would be the first grocery store. So this would be the first one. And it sells Bolivian products, which is just absolutely amazing. And so this is like a very big event for us to cover locally. But of course, if you follow my work, it's more than likely that you wouldn't see this because in English and for the foreign audience, these are not the topics that we focus on. So I want to talk about some of like the very bare basics. And a lot of people, someone such as Ramiro or Erika, are very familiar with how to shoot videos and how to, process these different materials in order to disseminate them over social media. And so some of this stuff might seem a little basic, but for us and from my perspective, it's very crucial for people to know how to do these things, because I myself have had so many comrades and friends and possible collaborators go to a place that I wouldn't be able to go to. For example, some of my friends from the Communist Party of Canada right now are in Athens, Greece. And I asked them to see if they can get some responses from people, or some sound bites, asking some of the militants there of the communists there in Greece what their response would be to the EU and the EU Parliament, and kind of the impositions and the interventionist statements they've made from the European Parliament about Bolivia, about Nicaragua, about Venezuela, and get a soundbite, because for Saskatchewan News, and here in Bolivia, we really want to hear what regular European people think, and if they really subscribe to these interventionist statements. And this becomes a problem, because just because you have someone there doesn't mean that they know how to shoot a video necessarily, or that they have the tools. Just because they are able to fly there, sometimes it's really difficult, and sometimes they actually will send us videos and things that we can't really use because it was done in the dark, or because the audio is bad, and different things like that. So these are some of the things that we want to address. So what we need to shoot a video. More and more of the content we see on social media and TV is filmed with mobile phones. In the global north, many journalists use newer iPhone models newer models of iPhone, Samsung, Huawei phones with the capacity to produce extremely high quality videos. And they have those same phones. Journalists have the same phones in Havana and Caracas and all capitals of Latin America and Caribbean countries. And traditional TV outlets don't always have budgets to upgrade equipment, especially in places like Bolivia. So it's even possible, particularly in countries of the global south, that a report or story can be produced on a smartphone that is even of higher quality than some of the conventional cameras. And as more independent outlets and reporters emerge, reporting through social media, it becomes, more competitive and more difficult for traditional media outlets to keep up. And so with DIY reporters and kind of guerrilla anti-imperialist media, such as ourselves, leading the way and sometimes getting more reach than the mainstream media, sometimes you'll even be attending an event like a press conference where you have the traditional TV networks there with their big clunky giant camera on a tripod, but you also have their correspondent reporting with her smartphone. And that person will actually just tweet out, a clip of the press conference immediately. And it goes out faster than it could go out on the TV cameras, which have to wait for the segment to air, which have to wait for the midday program to air. So it's very obvious that even, the outlets that are run by the oligarchy, owned by the oligarchy, and these right-wing outlets, which we have so many of here in Bolivia, are increasingly forced to use their cell phones and tweet out this information as soon as possible in order to compete with outlets and journalists such as ourselves. And particularly with streaming live, of course, where you can just have just as many followers on a Facebook account, or sent to a YouTube stream, than the stream of a television network. And of course, with fewer and fewer people watching television, if a mobilization is going to take place or a press conference, people will look for a source online before turning the TV on. So what are some things you need? I have a couple of pictures there of a tripod, a mono So these are just some images of some of the reporting that we do here at Saskatchewan News and Radio Saskatchewan Koga. So here are three really great tools, and everyone kind of has to pick which they prefer. The first one is just a very small tabletop tripod. And this design of this one here is a very good tripod. You're not going to be able to use it, it's not going to be your height or anything like that, but it's specifically good for filming things where you're sitting across from a minister, let's say, or you're sitting at a table with someone and you just want to place the tripod there to be able to record someone that you're sitting face to face with. And it's very sturdy. And there's a lot of really inexpensive ones too that you can just buy for a couple dollars, in Quito and Ecuador, we saw so many of those, but some of them are not as sturdy and they break really easily. So it's very important to kind of, play around with the item if you can before you buy it, because sometimes it is, worth it to spend like $15 on one of these tripods rather than spending $3 if it's going to last you a lot longer. And as someone who lives in a place where here in Bolivia, you can buy an infinite amount of things in all sorts of markets for very, very cheap, it's good to just invest a little more in something that you're not going to have to replace anytime soon. The second tripod is along the lines of what I use. And the one I use actually has a height of 8 feet, which is extraordinarily tall. But this means that if you're recording at events where there's a stage, and sometimes the stage is very high, and on top of that, the person who you're trying to film is tall, and you're trying to film, of course, their face, not their feet or their waist, it's important to have a good tripod, one that you feel comfortable with and one that is sturdy. And so for long periods of time, and short people problems, as the comment says from Libre there, a lot of the events that we cover here, we're literally standing for 4 hours on our feet, just trying to get a soundbite from President Luis Arce or from Evo. And so it can be a really long time on your feet. And so a selfie stick is not going to be your best option. A selfie stick might be inexpensive, but it's difficult to hold steady and it gets very tiring after a period of time. And the last one there I have is called a monopod. Apparently, I never even knew what the name was. I was trying to call it a unipod, and then I was trying to look up different models and they call them a monopod, but it's something that it's not a tripod, but it can be even better in some ways because it's so compact and it really folds down. It's something that I could fit into my backpack, which I couldn't fit a tripod in my backpack. And it's easier to keep steady, and you can kind of like lean on it or have it lean on you, and you can stream for a really long time or record for a really long time. And some of them have, some of them can be quite tall, like 6 feet. So that's a really great tool to have. So there's a couple other ones here. One is a gimbal, which is just kind of like really good for mobilizations. If you're going to be actually in the march, if there's a march taking place and you want to be with the marchers while you're covering it, it's really good to have something that will stabilize. And the last photo there is, of course, a selfie stick, which again, I think is a last resort because it gets very difficult to hold over a period of time. And, some of them you can't even hold up that high. So anyways, so also moving on, a microphone is really important. It can be earbuds or a microphone that connects via Bluetooth or through, your phone's adapter. And a lot of the earbuds that I think came with a Huawei phone that we have that Ollie uses. And it's some of these that actually come with the phones, believe it or not, are some of the better microphones you can get, because we have gone to electronics markets and purchased, or even electronic stores in the city and purchased, microphones that are kind of supposed to be, they're like 2 meters long or, really long in length, and they're supposed to be professional, but actually they pick up a lot of background noise. And sometimes what comes with our actual phones, have some of the best microphones for doing interviews or or anything else. So this is really important, and just not to, just to offer some constructive criticism, even in the beginning, one of our comrades in one of these videos had a lot of background noise, and what they were saying was really important, of course. And so it would have been great if they had used a microphone, and I'm guilty of not using microphones sometimes as well, but a lot of our audience complains and actually comments on some of the reports and sound bites we do when we don't use a microphone. I mean, people have really been on me about it, but it's not because I don't want to use one. It's always because they break, or because we're sharing them, or something has happened. And so lighting, whether you're recording a report, whether you're recording a statement from a leader, a social leader, or if it's an interview or a testimony at the scene of a massacre, which was the case here in 2019 when I reported on the Sincata and Sacaba massacres, or a press conference or anything else, you need to make sure that your subject is illuminated. You need to make sure that you don't have backlighting, but rather that your front is lit, or the person who's supposed to be demonstrated in the soundbite, in the video. And don't be afraid to take someone, a leader, an important leader, especially if you have someone, if the person is like Fausto, you might think that he's really busy and has a lot to do, but don't be afraid to take him to a better setting where there's better lighting and where there's better, where there's a better background in front of the protest, in front of the Congress, where there's actually people standing behind him. You don't want to, you don't want to just kind of take him over to like an empty area on the side of the road where there's nothing there behind him, because it just kind of seems like nothing's going on. And people are going to be drawn to videos where there's a lot of activity. It's like, wow, that looks like 100,000 people are standing behind Fausto. Like, let's see what he has to say. So that's really important. And you really have to take the lead, and you really have to treat yourself like you're a CNN journalist. In that sense, in the sense of directing things, in the sense if you want people to stand in a certain place for you to take a picture, take a video, sometimes you have to kind of move in and tell people, what you need for your particular video. It's really important to make sure that you have enough battery charge, buy charger banks, have charger banks. A lot of times, we're out for long periods of time, and we need to make sure that we can maintain the live stream, or that we can record, the video for 2 hours consecutively. It's important to make sure that we have enough data. In Latin America, we purchase data kind of pay as you go. Almost everybody has pay as you go. We don't have like month-to-month data plans, or I'm sure they exist for some companies, but none of us use it. And so it's really important that we have enough data to be able to do our jobs. And of course, enough space on our devices to be able to record for a long period of time. I always tell people, and I even my colleagues here, to wipe the lens of their phones. So, there's always oil and dirt on our phones. And I've seen people with brand new iPhones, and iPhones take very good videos. They always have, but particularly now, the newer models take unbelievable video. And sometimes the videos look very blurry. And it's a lot of times it's because people don't actually wipe, ideally with a cotton cloth, the lens, and it can get really dirty, and it can be very, it can really, take down the notch of the sort of level of the video. So it's really important to make sure that you're all set up in that sense. Let's see. When you're recording yourself, if you're the person who's going to be, giving a report or a statement in front of your camera, make sure that you stand in front of the march, in front of the crowd, in front of a banner, signs, people chanting. And of course, make sure that the mic is hooked up to yourself or the subject of your video. And it's really important, so we'll go down a slide. When we're setting up the camera to record ourselves, this is me standing in front of Evo last week at the beginning of the Congress here. I was going to record a report, but I was very sweaty. And so I just decided that I don't need to be sweaty on camera. So I didn't actually publish that. move on to the next slide. So, so this is a very well-framed report that I did here when I was still with Telesur. And it's good because when you are submitting sound bites or reports or materials to news outlets, they always have logos, identifiers, and different things going across the screen. And you don't want to have your face in any way cut off or covered. So this is why it's so important to make sure that you have a few inches above your head and several below, because most of the time the identifiers and kind of the tickers and things that they have running across, sometimes there are layered tickers, one with your name, one with other information, with news updates. Those are always going to cut off the speaker. They're always going to cover, you can move on to the next slides. You know, they're always going to cut off. This is just another example of a good place to take a video, because you know that, you know, Patricia Arce is standing in front of a multitude of people. A lot of people would try to stand and film her directly in front of her and just film her face head on, which would be great in some senses, but you know, it's good to see that she's actually with people. And the next one, if you can just move on to the next slide. Here's another one where, you know, anytime Lula speaks, it's going to be in front of, you know, thousands of people. But it's really important that we stage him there. So this is a great image and soundbite, an interview that one of my colleagues here did just a couple of days ago. And unfortunately, her face is going to get covered if we air it here with the identifiers. You can move on to the next slide. It'll just get covered up. And so here's an example where, you know, it covers her entire chin. When she starts talking and her mouth starts moving, it's actually going to cover her mouth as well, because people start leaning and they kind of reposition themselves while you're recording them. So it's very important to make sure that their head is completely clear of the subtitles, as it is in the case of the woman on the right. They're both important leaders here of the Federation and of the mass. You can continue. This is another thing to look for when you're doing live streams. This especially happens during live streams. People get really tired when they're not using tripods and they're using selfie sticks. And you know, the video just falls. You start looking at people's waists, it just gets shaky. This is just like, you know, it's a crime, because when outlets try to pick it up, or if you think it's very important and you want to send it to Press TV or you want to send it to RT, they're not going to want to use things where it seems like the camera person is getting tired or being lazy. They want to see the faces. They want to see the action. So it's really important to try to avoid this as much as possible. So also, we're always looking for horizontal videos. It has to be landscape on a whole. In general, if you're going to try to submit to outlets, you know, like more major outlets, or, you know, ask for larger platforms to pick up your video, it's good to record videos landscape. They're much more likely to want to use it. That's, of course, unless you want to additionally film for TikTok, for Snapchat, or for Instagram stories. Now Facebook has stories, and those are, of course, vertical videos, portrait mode, but it's unlikely that news outlets are going to be looking for that sort of thing. And of course, you know, when we're trying to amplify something that's going on, in the case of, you know, the Bolivian coup and the rejection of the coup and the fight by the Bolivian masses against the coup, we wanted outlets to pick up our own videos that we were taking here. So we needed to make sure that it was the kind of material, even though we don't have the latest phones, we don't have like an iPhone 13 or whatever, but we want to make sure that we give it the best possible chances of getting replicated and reproduced everywhere on social media and on television. So these are some of like the important things that we have to consider. It is always going to be easier to hold your phone the way you normally hold it and take the video. But it's, you know, people like watching videos in landscape mode, unless it's, you know, a 5-second TikTok, of course. So how to edit a DIY video. We use apps on mobile phones. We use one called InShot, which allows us to subtitle add logos, and do quick basic edits on our mobile phones. And it's important to learn how to use those because even conventional news correspondents, as I said earlier, are now required to tweet material on the fly in order to get these stories out as soon as possible. So before, correspondent teams would go out, they would shoot videos on scene, and then they would go back to their office. They would travel back as a team in the press vehicle to their office, and then 2 hours later they start editing it, and then by the 6 p.m. news they put it out. That's no longer good enough, and so they're doing the same things we're doing. They're also having to edit their own. And news bosses are pressuring them to tweet out the information as soon as possible, or to send their materials so that it can air on television as soon as possible. Every day you're seeing iPhone videos on mainstream news outlets now. They just don't identify them as cell phone videos because the quality is so good now that they don't have to apologize for using cell phone videos rather than from cameras, big conventional cameras. So adding logos, subtitles, and text can be quite simple, but it's important to consider the audience. If your aim is to have big outlets or other outlets, let's say Redfish is kind of just like a social media outlet. But if you want them to pick up on your exclusive video, you may want to refrain from editorializing. You might not want to add all these logos and subtitles and things because they're going to want to add their own style of subtitles and their own logo. So you might want to consider recording something clean and sending it to them in that sense. And so it's really important, I think, that one thing that social movements are not the greatest at is sometimes when they begin recording the video, there's a person counting down and they're just like, okay, uno, dos, tres, listo, 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 listo. And then you just hear all these people directing the thing. And then there's I don't know, just a lot of activity going on. So it's really important to trim down your video to make sure that it begins and ends where it's supposed to. And far too often we're hearing the person behind the camera and kind of is that okay? Is that good? At the end, or are we done? Or just these little cues and these side conversations. And it really kind of takes away from the message sometimes when it's posted on social media that way. And I don't know, in our case, we're not as careful about that as we could be. But the right-wing media is just on us. This is a social movement. The Six Federations is a union of rural workers. We're not like some politician, we're not some famous celebrity, but we get attacked and trolled the way very famous celebrities do. And there are people from the outlets who are assigned to listen to the radio and assigned to watch the radio programs and follow our social media just to be able to make fun of the stuff that we put out, because there's this huge war on the mass here. So it's very important to, in that sense, try to professionalize these things and minimize those sorts of errors in the editing of the video. It's also one thing that we always tell people when they send us videos, this is always the case at Telesur, is to not necessary to salute the audience or give a huge introduction. In Spanish, people love doing that. They like saying, thank you so much to all of our viewers. We're sending you a warm welcome from the Tropico of Cochabamba on this 200th anniversary of the independence, blah, blah. And that could be good, but sometimes if what you're trying to do is make a demand or alert of a very urgent situation, in the case of a social leader who wants to speak to an international community, let's say in the case of Colombia, you're saying that the rights of your peoples and indigenous peoples, peoples from a rural area your rights are being violated by the encroachment of ESMAD, of riot police or the Colombian military on your territory. You want to just make sure that you let people know what's going on and you make your plea, you make your demand, and all the crucial information is there, but you can't prolong it with extra unneeded information. Let me just try to speed things up just a bit. Another thing is, unless your video needs to be compressed because you're sending it through WhatsApp, because you're in an area with very little or slow internet, it's very important to maintain the highest resolution possible, and send those materials to your colleagues, to your compañeros, to a news outlet that might be able to publish it for you, a community outlet or whatever it is, in high resolution. So send it to them through WeTransfer, through Dropbox, through Telegram by increasing to the maximum resolution possible, because we don't need compressed bad quality images. It's just not as shareable as ones that are high quality. So other things that could make your message or video more shareable is, of course, subtitling it, making it available in more languages, translation in different languages. If you yourself or someone in your organization is able to do the translation, it's just going to get shared so much more. You don't necessarily need to subtitle it, that translation. You could send just the clean video. Let's say I want Brazil de Fato or Media Ninja or one of the main alternative outlets in Brazil to share something from Bolivia. The soundbite here or the press conference here will be in Spanish or Quechua, but if we're able to transcribe it for them, they could potentially put it in a translator online. Or if we're able to translate it in Portuguese for them and just give it to them in a document, then they can match it up with the video and they can decide whether or not to voice it over or whether to subtitle it. And it can be very helpful for them. But if it's not already in their language or it's not transcribed and they don't know what it's about, it's going to be very difficult for anyone to go through the trouble of using it, because a lot of news outlets are also, under austerity as well. They're getting, as Ramiro has said, they're getting, picked up into larger media conglomerations. And, a lot of these very important tasks and jobs are being scrapped for them as well. So there's not always translators available. If you can do the translation, it's very helpful. And then it's very, very important to say in the video, if if you're in the middle of the Sencata massacre, to use my own example, when I was here during the coup and the Sencata massacre took place on November 19th, 2019, it's very important to say the location where you are and not just say it, but also spell it out when you're sending. In my case, I was reporting for Mint Press News. To spell out the location. Not everyone knows what Sencata is. It's a district of El Alto, but people wouldn't recognize it. People recognize the city of La Paz. In the case of even Central American towns and communities, they're very difficult names to pronounce and write. So it's very necessary that we provide news outlets or the platforms who are going to share our media, or our comrades, or solidarity organizations, or whoever we're sending to. They need to know how to spell the names of the location. They need to know the time this takes place. They need to know the name of the organization that the people are from who are being shown in the video or who are sending the video, and the names of the leaders. This is really important because a lot of people are not going to want to use videos that are just coming from anyone. I mean, if you're making a claim against the law enforcement of a country, you're saying they're killing us. This is a really big claim to make, and you need to say exactly who they are, who's killing us. You need to say who's being killed, who are the people being killed, and all of these details are extremely important. We should never be sending and sharing videos without saying at least what the organization is. If the person doesn't want to be identified, if they want to have their identity concealed, we still need to say, what community they come from or what they represent. And it makes it much more credible, especially when you're reaching out to organizations in solidarity or grassroots movements or popular mass movements in Africa and Asia and other parts of the world, because they're not familiar with all of these different, all the different regions of Latin America and these specific things. So we're pretty short on time. So I just wanted to say that, there's so many different scenarios that we need to, that we could give a little more attention to, protests, rural areas, without cellular coverage, interviews, statements, live streams, and multilingual coverage that could kind of all get their own workshops. And as kind of like a guerrilla journalist, or someone who I believe firmly that all of us are journalists. Basically, anyone who is a part of some sort of leftist organization, particularly anti-imperialist organizations, and increasingly, people are just using their own Twitters, Instagrams, and TikToks in order to circulate very necessary information at timely moments. And you would be surprised when you live in the global South, the extent to which big outlets, international outlets, news outlets do not have collaborators in the specific location you're in. They keep their collaborators and their correspondents in the capital or in the largest cities. So there's just like a 100% chance that if a major mobilization is taking place in a rural area or far from the capital, that there's not going to be anyone covering it. So it's really important that people understand the role that we have, or the potential we have to get that information out. And if we wanted to be collaborators for some of the more mainstream outlets, they might not want to use our names. They might not agree with our ideology, but they would actually still take some of our content a lot of the time, because they don't, there's absolutely no one there to contribute. So it's important to know that like just anyone can have a major impact, by sending in their news stories to outlets. But like I said, or let me see but it's important for that to happen, the date, the location, the clear information about what the story is, because news producers in these news outlets and these newsrooms are lazy, and they're also oftentimes exploited, overworked, and they're always going to first use information and prepackaged stories from news agencies like Reuters, AP, FA, and Reply, because those agencies prepackage their information. They have a title that you can just use, but they'll have a subtitle. They have well organized and clear information that's copy edited. They have a script with translations. So you can have the same story and use it in Portuguese, French, and Spanish often. They translate their sound bites. So all of the, they're going to refer to those outlets or those agencies for their content. So that's to say, if there's a big mobilization here in Bolivia, there's, if it's in La Paz, for example, AFP will definitely have a person. And so if I'm here and AFP is here, you need to make sure that, that our outlets, our materials are produced and created created to be just as accessible and usable and attractive to different outlets, so that they'll pick up ours instead of theirs. Because of course the AFP material will have very much a pro-Washington, pro-imperialist line. And a lot of times the sound bites that they choose, let's say a sound bite of President Arce, will be one that we wouldn't necessarily highlight, or that doesn't drive home the sort of idea that we're trying to create. And so it's really important to make sure that it's most accessible. Let's see. Also, bigger outlets and big platforms are not going to pick up random stories, unfortunately. Like I said earlier, the grocery store opening here, this coffee producer here, these people produce, whatever it is, chocolate products. People don't really care internationally. It's why we don't do as many. Unfortunately, sometimes we don't do so many like cultural or local Bolivia stories. We only cover them for Spanish. In English, we don't do it. It's really important to try to connect them to, larger issues or trending issues in order for them to get picked up, because not everyone just wants to hear about chocolate made in Bolivia, unless you frame it in a certain way. If you frame it, as, chocolate made in Bolivia is being presented at like some, big international UN debate or something, or event, maybe people will care, but otherwise it's just a random story. But that being said, I do think it's really important to try to, as much as possible, as much as we want to compete with these big outlets and these massive platforms, that we do highlight our culture and try to distinguish ourselves from these mainstream outlets with our ideologies, and showing our truth that it's just completely unavailable and doesn't exist on these other platforms. It's very important to show people how they are, how people actually live. The way people live here in the area we live in is nothing like how people live in the city or in other countries that are more developed. And so these are kind of the sorts of angles that we need to be showing. It really helps bring a lot more truth to the world. And I have seen the impact that has been made by just our coverage on Bolivia, that kind of shows people that even in like Managua, people live so differently than they do here in developing Bolivia. And it really helps connects things in quite a in a way that's really important. I think it's also very connects things for people in other parts of the global South, where some people in parts of Africa have told us, some of our colleagues from Telesur have told us that there's just so much in common with the place that they're from as with Bolivia. And this is something that they wouldn't have known had it not been highlighted in English on a platform such as ours. So it really helps bridge the movements and our popular struggles. And as much as people have made comments about how we do our media in English, which is supposed to be, is a colonizer language. It's the language of the imperialists. It's also a language that is most widely spoken in all parts of the world, particularly in Asia and Africa and the Caribbean, where we're trying to bridge struggles. So I'll end it there.
Thank you so much, Camila. I really appreciate your presentation, the practical pieces of it, and also the pieces that helped. I think some of us, I saw Leroy put in the chat, helped us laugh too, because they're the same challenges, of doing what you both have called guerrilla communications, doing it on the fly, doing it as social movement organizations. So thank you. I'm looking at the time because we have about 13 minutes left, which is a little bit less time than we had anticipated for a Q&A, which I think is because you both had really excellent content to share with us. I'll say one more time, we'll share the copies of the presentations with everyone who's connected. And over time, we also translate all of the materials, and we also make available each class session available in a more edited format online. Afterwards, because we want the content from the Ben Linder Solidarity School to circulate around the world and be of use for grassroots organizations, social movement organizations, anti-imperialist organizations, solidarity organizations, because we feel like this information is really important. So in this very short amount of time that we still have, I'd like to invite maybe one or two questions or comments from those of us that have joined today, that can hopefully kind of be a pause or a conclusion on this initial 2 hours of conversation with Ramiro and with Camila. So the way we always do this is people could write their question in the chat, or they can raise their hand. We might not be able to do everyone's questions today, depending on how we do on time. Let's see. So I see 2 questions that have come in through the chat. So this is a good one from Betty, who I think is probably my comrade Betty from Why Hunger. How do you deal? Hi, Betty. Maybe I'll read both the questions that have come in so that both of you could each respond, and that could be kind of our conclusion. So how do you deal with the tax to the important communications work that you're doing, the important communications you're uplifting? Thank you, Betty. And then Rodrigo from El Salvador, also a student. Let's see, he does it in Spanish. Let's see if I can read it here in English. How can we achieve a true communications platform that is revolutionary, peasant, and popular, and that competes with the capitalist platforms? And he's also mentioning how the peasantry could have more intention or desire to work on communications in their communities, but there's also a lot of challenges. For example, not a good network coverage to be able to connect to the internet, maybe not good devices or certain tools, or maybe not the access to certain training to be able to do these kinds of communications pieces. And then maybe I'll just throw in Amita's, what would be some other languages that would be helpful for us to learn in order to facilitate media distribution. So maybe we can go, Ramiro, if you want to respond to any of those questions or make any final comments, we'll go to you, and then we'll go to Camila.
For sure. So thank you, Betty. The attacks on the communications that we're uplifting, some of the attacks are censorship, also self-censorship. That's another thing that's really talked about. But because of YouTube policies, if you're in any way, like some people, when the Syria stuff was happening, were self-censoring and didn't want to report about it, because if you did, you were branded a conspiracy theorist, kicked off. So censorship, I'd say, is one of the biggest attacks, especially for reporters, revolutionary journalists from the global north, in the global south, or elsewhere. So I would say that the best way to deal with the censorship is to be on multiple platforms, save your content, have, diversify your supply chain, so to speak, have multiple platforms where you're posting on. I think that's the best way to ensure that you won't get completely wiped off, because it's happened before. In terms of Rodrigo's question about the campesino popular media, I think it's important to also keep in mind, you always want to also keep in mind who is your target audience, right? Because I think, like, for example, in Rodrigo's case, his target audience would be other campesinos in the global south, or people in oppressed communities. He's not probably going to want to talk to some wealthy banker in Manhattan who has like the fastest internet connection. So I think you also have to adapt in a situation where you have limited resources and tools. You have to adapt your communication to what is locally the biggest thing. So for example, if you're in the countryside, or if you're somewhere that has not that good of a internet connection, WhatsApp tends to be, at least from my understanding, it depends on the region, WhatsApp tends to be one of the best ways to communicate. And actually, this is something that in Venezuela, they've been forced to do because of the sanctions and internet. Not everyone has been able to access internet, is that they'll have entire workshops and trainings on WhatsApp, like a giant WhatsApp chat, instead of like a Zoom conference or a video, because they can't handle all of the things. So they'll have a whole like conversation as like voice notes or little video clips, and it'll be set up that way. So you kind of have to adapt to whatever is most popular in your area. And even in that way, like, for example, right, if you wanted to, like, one idea I had for campesino communications media, since everyone has WhatsApp and everyone at least has like some kind of phone in the campo, you can have people respond, you can have conversations through voice notes, and then you can have one person in the city or somewhere where they have more technology to edit all of those voice notes together into like one podcast. That's one idea that you can do. But I think the most important thing is just being able to understand like what technology is easiest for people to access, instead of working backward, right? Like, we're not going to figure out how do we get everyone high-speed internet and these fancy cameras. We kind of have to work the opposite way, right? How do we make the most out of the small technology that we have? And that tends to be a smartphone and WhatsApp, So, and you can still do a lot with that. Honestly, you could do entire podcasts with that. You could do some good videos. So I think that's kind of the way to approach it. And lastly, Amita's question, in languages, I would say that I definitely agree with Camila. English is the language that the world uses everywhere. India, South Asia, Africa, the Caribbean, like everywhere, English tends to be dominant. So I would say English. I would also say that it really depends on what kind of again, right? Who is your target audience? I think that's really what's important to keep in mind. I think also, obviously Spanish and English in our case, but I think that it really depends on who your audience is and where you want to expand. I think one of the languages, unfortunately, that are very translated, sorry, or under, like there's not much information about is in Portuguese. And it's ironic because like Brazil's the largest Latin American country, and the one of the biggest populations in the region, and yet there's very little Spanish to Portuguese or English to Portuguese communication. So I think that's one area that would be useful. And so yeah.
Thanks, Ramiro. So we'll go back to Camila for final comment.
Yeah, I totally echo the sentiment about Portuguese, and I haven't done my share to contribute to that. We have done some Portuguese to English translations on Casacho News, but it is something that we have the capacity to do. We just haven't really turned towards Brazil so much, but I'll be in Brazil next year, and I think it's very important. We have a lot of collaborators as well who are or friends who are in Brazil and have offered their collaboration. And so I just think that I mean, I've said this before to people, if you ever hear me talk about Brazil, I just think it's its own universe, its own world. It's a massive country. It's like a continent of its own. And it's just like the most important country in Latin America to me sometimes. And it's one that I don't really talk about because I've never been a correspondent in Brazil or anything like that. But it just has obviously very important mass movements that we need to be communicating with, that we need to be following as an example. And the struggles there are just so important and so interconnected with all of our struggles. Obviously, the Bolivia Campesina knows because of the MST, but also so many other movements of young people in Brazil, such as the homeless workers movement, and all of the array of leftist political parties there. So I think Portuguese would be very important. In my experience, there are a lot of comrades in Africa who speak English. So we'll continue working in mainly those three languages, English, Portuguese, and Spanish. In terms of, I would also, I think that's really interesting about the workshop or the information being disseminated through WhatsApp. Of course, we utilize it a lot, but I think it's just amazing what you can accomplish in a workshop of just like 2 hours, a practical in-person workshop. And so I would say that it would be very beneficial to hold 2-hour workshops with organizations in rural areas of Central America in particular. And I'd be willing to get involved in something like that, particularly in El Salvador, where I have a couple of links. I could definitely have more. I wish I had more, but and I would really like to kind of share some of the information I have, because it's very obvious that when the big outlets don't show up to cover something, or when people are tasked with covering their own media, their own events, and filming their own social leaders, that it's just something that hasn't really that hasn't been carried out in the best of ways. So in terms of not having adequate devices, I think this is a huge problem that I have been seeing for as long as I've been around. As long as we've been making cell phone videos or whatever, and people have had smartphones in the global north, I immediately noticed that this wasn't the case in the global south. And so I do think that there could be more collective efforts made, but I don't know which those are, to be able to put just a few smartphones in the hands of people who could help us in their contributions as popular communicators of their own organizations. That would be something that needed to be devised. As far as attacks on the communications we're uplifting, I don't have any answers for that, but we do get attacked a lot.
Great, thank you, Camila. And thank you again, Ramiro. So just like that, Camila talking about 2-hour workshops in person, our 2-hour class online has run out of time. I do like that suggestion though a lot. I really do think that even though the pandemic has in some ways allowed us to learn how to use digital technologies for training and for exchanges, it never replaces the power of being able to do things in person, exchange in person, and learn from one another in person. So thank you for that. I want to thank everybody for being here today, for those that have been joining us every week in this Ben Linder Solidarity School, and those that have joined us specifically for today's class. You're all invited to continue connecting. We have just a few more classes left. So next week, we're going to have a class about popular peasant feminism, which will be taught by the team here that's part of the Movimiento de Mujeres del Campo, or Rural Women's Movement of the ATC, which has played and continues to play a very important role for defending rural women in Nicaragua. And then our last class, which is on Saturday, October 9th, is an introduction into Friends of the ATC itself, also the historic memory of the ATC and what we can continue to do moving forward to build solidarity, because one of the very concrete goals of the Ben Linder Solidarity School is what concrete actions can we take as participants of the school to continue constructing internationalism, anti-imperialist internationalism and solidarity.